Britain is hosting the G7 Foreign Ministers Summit this week, their first in-person meeting since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Today, Britain will seek to come to an agreement of decisive action from the G7 partners to protect democracies against global threats like those posed by China and Russia. In addition to the G7 members, which are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the United States, Britain has also invited ministers from Australia, India, South Africa and South Korea. Britain sees this first in-person meeting in 2 years as a chance to reinforce support for the rule-based international system when it's under threat from China's economic influence and Russia's maligning activities. On Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Raab and said that there was a need to force a global alliance of freedom-loving countries, though he stressed that the United States did not want to hold China down.
It is not our purpose to try to contain China or to hold China down. What we are trying to do is to uphold the international rules-based order that our countries have invested so much in over so many decades, to the benefit, I would argue, not just of our own citizens, but of people around the world, including, by the way, China.
Now, Raab also said that he wanted the G7 to consider tackling Russia's propaganda, its troop maneuvers at the Ukraine border, and the imprisonment of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny.
The door for positive relations and diplomacy is always open to us, and I think that's something shared across many of the NATO countries. But what's got to change is Russia's behaviour as a P5 member of the Security Council, against the basic norms of international law, whether it's the brinkmanship and the saber-rattling on the border with Ukraine, whether it's the cyber attacks and the misinformation, or indeed the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, which was not just a human rights abuse, but a use of chemical weapons on Russian soil.
Now, today's discussion will also cover the coup in Myanmar, urging stronger action against the military junta and more humanitarian assistance. And WION correspondent Rachel Silverman is joining us live from San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Britain sees this first in-person meeting as a chance to reinforce support for the rule-based international system. And they've also added that it's under threat from China's economic influence and Russia's activities. Now, we know that China and Russia are top of the agenda here. Could you just walk us through this and what we can expect on this front?
Well, at this G7 meeting in London, they will be discussing, as you mentioned, China and Russia, as well as battling the COVID-19 pandemic and the spread of climate change in the run-up to the leaders' meeting next month. The main points for the U.S., this is a chance to foster a message of multilateralism after 4 years of that Twitter diplomacy under Donald Trump, which variously shocked, bewildered, and alarmed many of our Western allies. So these diplomats are keen to let the world know that the West does indeed plan to assert itself, that these leaders are going to be looking at ways to quickly counter Russian propaganda and disinformation so they can, in a coordinated way, start to respond very quickly when Russian disinformation pops up. That way they can counter it before it really gets ingrained in the public consciousness. And then the other big item on the agenda is looking for ways to stand up to the country that they believe is really their biggest long-term competitor, and that's China. That's one of the reasons that beyond the G7 countries that are meeting this week and will meet next month, they've also invited leaders from India, Australia, and from South Korea. And that's no accident. They're looking to create and shore up another power center in Asia that can really compete with China's regional and global influence, which many countries have said out loud, and Secretary Blinken has said recently that that's really our biggest long-term challenge, a China that doesn't always play by the rules.
All right. Also, the Myanmar military coup will also be a point of discussion here. What can you tell us about that?
Well, of course, the Myanmar military coup has been on the minds of all the Western leaders since it happened, and this will be a way for the G7 countries to stand together, to speak as one voice, and to try to exert their influence in that arena as well.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much for your inputs on that. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.